Ichimon Japan is made possible by Patreon support. If you would like to make sure that we can keep bringing you more content like this, then head on over to japankyo.com/Patreon and sign up for as little as $1 a month. Yeah, we'll leave it at that. We'll come back with the whole...
If you could picture that like design of like the monkey like slowly becoming a human, it starts with Baikimon and slowly becomes this girl in a mini skirt with blonde hair.
Yeah, like Shibuya, yeah. Welcome to Ichimon Japan. My name is Tony and
I'm Ryan.
All right, so
Hi.
Ichimon, hey, hi. You're spoiling it. We'll get to that.
Well, I'm leaving,
right.
so hi.
Yeah. So Ichimon means one question, and every episode we ask one question about Japan. And today's question is, does hi mean bye in Japanese? All right, so that's why Ryan was saying hi a little while ago. So before we get to that, though, so how do you say bye in Japanese, Ryan?
Like me personally, or how do people?
Well, I was shooting for the, if you ask the typical person outside of Japan that has no knowledge of Japanese, what do you think they would say?
They will say sayonara.
Yes, and in formal occasions, you might say sayonara suckers, right?
So that's pretty formal, but yeah.
Yeah. So exactly. I think if you ask the average person that hasn't studied Japanese, sayonara has become, and you would hear it pronounced like that, right? Sayonara.
Yeah. Sayonara.
Yeah, by English speakers at least. I mean, that's just basically common knowledge. Like pretty much anybody is going to know that.
They won't even let you into Japan if you don't know that. It's on their little entrance test.
What misguided thing about Japan do you know? Okay, here's the checklist. All right, yeah, you're a foreigner. You can come in. So most people would say sayonara, but once you scratch the surface, once you go a little bit beyond that, cursory level, you start to realize that there's actually a whole lot more ways to say goodbye, bye in Japanese. And most people in most situations don't actually use sayonara, right? Or sayonara, or that would be something closer to how it's pronounced in Japanese. But what are some, you know what? Before we get to what are some of the more common ways of saying it, let's pick apart what sayonara even really is, where it came from, what's the etymology?
Well, it came from Spain.
Yeah, well, pan happens to sound exactly like Spanish, right? And
pan
that means
came
bread.
from Portuguese, man. Keep it straight.
I was yes-anding here. I was trying to...
It has nothing to do with Spain.
Yeah, it has nothing to do with Spain. Anyway, sayonara, I guess you could say it's more akin to like farewell, right? It has a certain sense of finality, or you may not see a person for a long time. So in most situations, you're probably just going to see the person the next day if it's like at school or at work, right? So, when you leave the office, you're not going to say farewell, coworkers. According to one article that I found, the oldest, predecessor to sayonara that was found in written records dates back to around when, Ryan?
794 to 1185 in the early Heian period.
Right. And that was pronounced a little bit differently, which was, what is it?
Sayo de aru naraba.
Right. Now, that actually means something. Like, in that case, then, what was it?
You translate it as if it be thus.
If it be thus, right? So, yeah. If it be thus, and then, but even sayonara, like when you really think about it in Japanese and you pick it apart, like it still has that basic meaning. It's kind of like
how still there and nada still there.
Right. So like even farewell, like if you really think about it, right? Like farewell on your journey or something like that, right? Like, may you be well as you go off on whatever it is you're about to do. It's that same sort of thing, right? So sayo means like that, or that is the case, or there's different ways to pronounce it, but basically like that, or that is. And then nara is like a conditional, right? If that. So, if that's the case, if that's what's going on, then all right, bye, right? Like it's kind of like the finality, the last little tidbit of the actual bye of the salutation is kind of omitted, right? It's just ends in kind of an ellipsis, right?
Yeah. All the old farewells sound depressing, like they really believe they might die before their next meeting.
Well, yeah, I mean, it certainly was, a concern, I'm sure, for many people. You don't know. Like if you go off on a journey to the other side of the country, you may very well not come back.
Well, I mean, back in this era, the average lifespan was probably like 50 or less too. So
yeah, exactly.
Just living a normal life, you might not make it 2 weeks.
Yeah. And but also, I'm pretty sure there were other ways to say something akin to bye or see you later. Right?
They probably had their own slang back then that we just don't have recorded and written records.
Yeah, exactly. They probably said ciao or something like that.
Or Baibai Keen.
Baibai Keen, which we will get to. Baibai Keen. So basically, yeah, in a way, Sayonara retains that kind of original meaning. But I mean, most people don't think about it so literally, but it still has that nuance of finality to it, right?
I think people think of it as having that, but it is like, I think it's said slightly more than you would expect if that nuance was literal.
Right.
Because I do encounter it in my like weekly life, but it's not the common goodbye.
Exactly, yeah. And I remember like, pretty sure maybe like at work in a school in Kobe, I must have heard it a couple times at least. I do remember hearing it in Japan. Yes.
My Japanese teacher who I meet with weekly usually ends by saying that.
Oh, okay. Yeah, so it happens definitely. Context, person, there's always
context,
variation.
person, environment all play a role.
Now,
it's not the normal work or friendly one, which is why I think you don't hear it most of the time, but semi-formal relationship that's non-work, then it's kind of common.
Maybe, yeah. Like, I think, and this is, I'm going to get to like a survey that I found, but in the world of linguistics, particularly sociolinguistics, like surveys, sure, they are a reference, but like self-reporting, saying what you think you say is not always accurate because because people have pretty horrible memories or like lie on purpose. So what researchers do is they record actual conversations, record actual interactions to see what it is they're actually saying, right? Because people, they don't get it right. They don't have perfect memory.
Yeah.
All right, so let's get to this survey. So Ryan, can you give a brief explanation? I think this was done by the Japanese news website Live Door.
Okay.
Yeah.
So yes, as we were just saying, there was a study in 2016 that was self-reported, and about 70% of people claimed that they don't use it at all because it feels too final or distant.
Yeah.
However, their whole study was only 30 people.
Yeah, exactly. So. Yeah. It's a very small scale study. So again, that's why like you really have to think about where the data's coming from. But I felt comfortable enough using this because I think between the two of us, we've spent enough time in Japan to realize that, that seems at least reasonably accurate.
I think it's fair to say 70% of the time you don't use it.
Yeah, exactly. Yes.
But I feel like it's unlikely to find a person who literally never uses it.
Exactly. Yeah. There's still probably some situations where they will use it.
Yeah.
And then when you ask, like, when you put a person on the spot like that, it's like, so why don't you do that? Then they have to like come up with some like fabricated thing in the spur of the moment that may not necessarily be accurate. Let's then how do actually in daily conversation, in daily interactions, what are some of the more common ways that people actually say goodbye or bye? And that of course really depends on the context, the person that you're talking to, and each person's personality too, right?
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. I had a friend who her farewell was Kutabare.
All right. So that's basically like go to hell, basically.
Yeah, that was her greeting.
Yeah. So, I mean, not everybody in Japan is super, super formal, right? They always tell you, like, when you talk to the older person, you have to be like this, and it's like the textbook, but it's not always like that. And some older people, like, they'll tell you, like, no, just talk to me normal. I don't want you to talk to me like that. So yeah, time, place, occasion, person. So, but that being said, some of the more let's go with like the work situation, maybe.
Yeah, the one I use myself and hear by far the most often would be the person leaving saying "お先に失礼します," and then everyone around saying "お疲れ様です."
Yes, exactly. Yeah. So I live in Hawaii, but I work in an office where everybody's Japanese. We use Japanese in the office like 90% of the time or more. And exactly the same for me. So, 先に失礼します, which literally means I'm being rude for basically leaving before you. Something along those lines. Yeah. I mean,
I want to point out nobody's literally thinking that when they say it. It's just the standardized thing you say.
Exactly. Yeah. 失礼します is a more formal, I guess
it's like an excuse me.
Yeah, it's like an excuse me. Yeah. But a more formal kind of way of saying it.
Yeah.
And then sakini literally means like before, right?
Yeah.
So the implied portion is that you're leaving. Like they don't actually explicitly say that. And then in response, then people say like Otsukaresama desu, which literally means like, oh, you have exerted great effort, and I am acknowledging that.
Since we're going through all the like ways you can say it, you will also just hear Otsukaresama or Otsukare-san.
Yeah, there's many levels of formality.
Otsukare-chan.
Yeah, Otsukare-chan. Yeah, you might hear that in some. Yeah, that is like a classic. I think that came from a comedy routine originally, but yeah. So there's multiple variations of this, and to like go in depth into each one would end up with a 2-hour episode. But these are just the very basics. So for somebody in a work situation, or even maybe like for example, if you're in a university and you're leaving the club, you might say Otsukaresama desu. Like that's something that you'll hear. I think I remember hearing that when I was.
I think it's also not terribly rare to hear Sayonara after Otsukaresama desu. Especially like at least the situation I'm imagining is like they say Otsukaresama desu. And then you say a little bit extra, like, oh, tomorrow we'll do this. Like, oh, okay, sayonara. Like, they want to say goodbye again, but they don't want to say the same goodbye.
Yeah. Right. Yeah, that seems, I can't remember a specific case where that happened, but that seems like, perfectly feasible. Yeah. So then when you're, like, with friends, of course, then you get, like, other ones, like, jane. That's a pretty common one. And that also interesting, like, it's very... like implying, right? It's not explicit, kind of like sayonara almost, where it's like ja, which comes from dewa, which is basically almost like sayonara, which is like, all right then, if that's what's going on, then. Yeah.
It's interesting because like if we're talking about quote unquote literal translations, it means nothing.
Yeah, exactly. Ja, it's like, all right.
It's like you're about to say something and then you just stop.
Yeah, exactly. And ne has no like actual meaning. It's just like a functional thing, right? It's used all over the place, but there's no like, it's not like dog, inu, right? Like it has an actual semantic meaning. Yeah. So
it would be like if you just ended it by saying like, well then, and then like walked away.
Yeah. But I mean, if you're jane, it would be more like, well then, you have to say it a little bit more,
Yeah. It's not like jane. It's like jane.
Yeah. Well then. So yeah, and then
I don't know if this is just my experience, but when I lived in Osaka a decade ago, I heard this all the time. Here where I live, I never hear it. I don't know if it's a generation thing or just a place or just the situation I'm in being like in a more formal job, I guess. But
yeah, true. I mean, I think you were probably hanging around more people closer to your age range. Now it's mainly a work situation, I guess, right?
Yeah. I guess I'm a little more formal relationed with people.
I mean, and in since you're in a rural part of Japan, there's just less younger people, so maybe that's
true.
Yeah, you just have less chance to hear that.
It's funny you say that because the one I hear, if to like transition to the next one, by far the most frequently hear is Baibai.
Yeah. So
like my students to each other never say jane. Always bye-bye.
Yeah,
Boys
I
and
think
girls.
I hear that. I would hear that too, with especially younger people. I mean, it has a more juvenile kind of cute quality to it.
Yeah.
And of course, bye, right? It's written in katakana.
It comes from English
comes
bye.
from the English bye, right? I tried to briefly look into if there's some specific origin to that. Like there's some story that, some guy used it this time in a magazine article and then it spread. The best that I was able to find was that it seems to have come around after World War II. But
I'm guessing just when they started English education and people became to know it and thought it was trendier to say that instead of other things.
That seems like the most likely explanation. Unfortunately, when you try to look into that in Japanese, like you get a lot of just like it comes from the English goodbye, but like no details at all, like surrounding the story behind it. So
it is interesting because you can say bye-bye in English, but it's very uncommon.
Yeah.
It would usually just be bye or goodbye.
Yeah.
But neither of those are said in Japanese, only bye-bye.
Yeah, and bye-bye. Yeah, I mean, and even in English, like if you were to say bye-bye, it sounds kind of, I don't know, again, juvenile or cute or kind of...
Yeah, it sounds very childish. I imagine you're like an elementary school kid or younger.
Yeah.
But in Japan, like people in their 30s will say it to their friends.
Yeah. I think, and I mean, I just going from memory here, it seems like it's more used by women than men, but there's always exceptions.
That was my experience in Osaka, but here it seems like it's pretty even.
Oh,
that's why I'm not sure if it's a regional or a time, or just again me having weird anecdotal experiences.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and this is again like in order to really figure this stuff out, you need like massive amounts of data. But
I'm just doing personal anecdote experience, so don't draw anything from this.
Yeah.
I don't expect it to like match up with general Japan trends, which is why I'm pointing it out here, because I think it's strange that it's what my experience has been.
Yeah. Any other? Oh, yeah. Well, and interesting. Then there's others that are not typically translated as goodbye. I mean, I guess o先に失礼します. But anyway, like Ittekimasu.
Oh, yeah.
Like in the same kind of context, in an English-speaking country, you might say bye. But in Japan, it's a totally different expression. So when you leave the house in the morning, for example, a student going to school in the morning would tell their mom, Ittekimasu, right? And that's literally...
No,
it means
Ittekimasu.
Ittekimasu! Yeah. So it means like... okay, so literally it's go, come back. But the implication is I'm about to leave and I will be back later.
Because in the past, you just assumed they never would come back.
Yeah, in the past, people would just say, Iku.
I'm going to school. You'll never see me again.
Ikimasu, and they just know, okay, you may never come back. So I'm going now. Like, I won't be back.
And if it be thus, I will return.
Sayonara. And then when you say Ittekimasu, right, the person responds, the mother would respond, Itterashai, right? So basically like go and come back or something like that, right?
Yeah.
So
this one also, I believe, is still pretty frequent and common, but because I don't have a family in Japan, I don't really hear it very often. Yeah,
definitely. I mean, this is pretty widespread. Yeah. And
it's still used in the workplace if someone like leaves and comes back, like at lunch or something.
Yes. I would use that in my office too, or other people. Yeah, Ittekimasu. And then when they come back, either go okaeri and tadaima and that kind of thing. Yeah. So we have that. And is there any other?
Another pretty one, a common one is like mata ne or mata and then time.
Oh, yeah. Mata ne, which is literally like again.
Yeah.
Plus that meaningless ne, which is a functional kind of thing. But
in my brain, it's the more casual the thing that would correspond to like see you later.
Yeah. Mata ne or ja mata too.
Yeah, ja mata is also okay.
Yeah. So I think those are like really the most common equivalents to bye. And of course some are more some are a little bit closer to like see you later or something like that. But or ja atode. Yeah, you also do hear that. Ja atode, which literally is like all right, later. So which is like see you later basically.
Yeah.
So all these I think you hear far more often than sayonara.
Yes.
Now, before we get to the hi, we can also get into a couple of slang ones. So, for example, these are just like not common at all, but I just found them kind of funny. So, for example, there is Baibī, which
I know
have you ever heard of Baibī?
I've heard it, but I can't think of where.
So, well, I'll explain why you've probably heard it. But before I'll explain like where it came from.
I feel like some unfriendly character in a manga or something said it.
Probably. So basically, Baibī has become a trope, a kind of like reference joke kind of thing, because it came out, it became popular in like the 80s during the bubble era.
Which is also when they'd had B to people's names, I think.
Yeah. Well, they had like a whole bunch of like interesting little like linguistic, slang and all that stuff that like if you were to use today, like sincerely, they go like, "Oh, you're so old," like right, like you just come off like you're just a very old person that's still sticking to their old slang, because that was like back in the 80s.
Unless you're a foreigner, then they're just like, "What the heck are you doing?"
Yeah, it's like, why do you know that? Like they just get really surprised. So you still hear Baibī, like especially like in for example in comedy and stuff like that, because like I said, it's kind of like a reference back to the original like the 80s. So it's like tongue-in-cheek usage.
Yeah, it's going to always have some kind of sarcasm accompanying it, I think, now.
Yeah. And then sometimes you might, like you said, like maybe in a manga or something, they might use it just for the heck of it, just because it's kind of funny, cheesy. One thing that I saw online was that one of the ghosts in Pac-Man, in English, when he's taunting you, he says, "Smell you later," which again is a pretty like 80s, early 90s expression, right? And then apparently in the Japanese, it was Baibī. So I guess when they localized Baibī into English, because Pac-Man is originally a Japanese game, they thought "Smell You Later" was a good correspondent, a good, I guess, translation of Baibī.
I kind of like that because they're both like sort of rude things that people don't really say.
Yeah. It's a clever. I think whoever did that localization he had a good idea, or she had a good idea.
Yeah, sometimes they'd get things pretty well.
Yeah. So there you go, Baibī. Use it knowing that you have to express that that it's a totally lame expression to use. And then you will impress
Or if
your
you're
Japanese
talking
friends.
to a ghost.
Or if you're talking to a ghost. Or
a Pac-Man.
Yeah. Or if you're talking to somebody that still thinks they're in the 80s in Japan.
Yes, if you time travel to the 80s, just go wild.
Yeah, Baibī. All right. And then, and then the gyaru one, right?
Yeah.
So what?
Which is maybe not gyaru in origin.
Right. Okay. So gyaru, if you're unfamiliar, gyaru is this kind of like fashion subculture that I don't know exactly when it started, but it seems like it probably started around the early 90s.
Yeah, it feels like 90s to 2000s.
Yeah.
I have not seen it in years. I think it's still somewhere around in Japan, but not mainstream anymore.
Yeah,
now.
So perhaps like the image that most people are familiar with are like the kind of tanned girls that wear super like bright colors, flashy clothes, big earrings, really flashy jewelry, really flashy makeup, blonde-dyed, like bleach blonde hair.
So that's the most important thing, is the blonde hair.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think those are kind of the origins of the whole gyaru, and which it comes from gal, right? Gal, and then the katakana.
And why gal means that, I have no idea.
Maybe we can look into that later. I didn't. But, and then go, like Nihongo means Japanese language, right? Eigo means English language. Gyaru go means gal language. So they had slang, and these days, like you said, gyaru are not so common, and the fashion has kind of changed a little bit, but they had these all kinds of interesting slang, and one of them was apparently baibai kin, okay, which was how you say bye.
Baibai kin.
Baibai kin. Yeah, you got to elongate. But Ryan pointed something out when we were talking about this before we started recording. But what did you notice about baibai kin?
It's also what a famous cartoon villain from the show Anpanman says.
Yeah.
And I think that's the actual origin of the phrase, and they just liked him, I guess.
I guess so, because
he's fairly popular.
By Anpanman, if you're unfamiliar, because in Japan everybody knows who Anpanman is, but outside of Japan, not so many people know who Anpanman is. But so Anpan are these it's this bread with red bean paste inside. It's sweet. It's a very popular kind of sweet bread that you can get pretty much anywhere, a supermarket or convenience store.
And Anpanman is a superhero. Is he fully made of that, or is it just his head?
Okay, so that is a very good question. I'm not 100% sure about that. So, but the story is Uncle Jamu Oji-san, right?
Yeah, I think so.
I guess he creates Anpanman, this superhero. He has a cape and like tights. He looks like a Superman-ish kind of thing.
He's a pretty traditional superhero, except he's made of bread.
Yeah, but his head is one of these sweet bean buns. He has a face, and we don't know if his body is made of bread too. I have no idea. Yeah, but what he does is when people are like running out of energy, they're super hungry, he like saves them by giving them his head. So he sacrifices himself.
He tears off pieces of himself, of his head to feed them.
So he's a very Messiah-like, figure, right? He sacrifices himself for people, and then
except he's fine.
Except the Jam Oji-san, the Uncle Jam, he makes him a new head every time, right?
Yeah.
And then
I believe he's also weak to water because that would make him soggy.
Yeah, soggy bread, exactly. That makes total sense. And there's a whole cast of characters of like curry bread and melon bread, melon pan man, and they're all like different types of breads because man. So melon pan man just rhymes with pan, so I guess they're going with the whole like rhyme theme, pan man, and then that goes back to the superhero theme, Batman, Superman. So yeah, anyway, and that show has been around for at least like 30 years, maybe a little more.
I suspect more.
Yeah.
Hold on, I can probably check it real quick.
Let's check.
I feel like that and Doraemon were like from the 70s.
Well,
1973.
Oh, okay, yeah. Doraemon I think goes back. Yeah, Doraemon goes back to the 60s. So, but yeah, so 70s for Anpanman. So that is like 40 years.
Oh, apparently the actual book series stopped running in 2013, but the TV show's still going.
All right, so over 40 years for the...
Yeah. And I suspect many of the listeners, unless they're really into Japan, have probably never heard of Anpanman. Mm-hmm. It is by far the most popular like anime superhero thing in Japan. Way more than Dragon Ball or Naruto or One Piece or any of those.
Yeah, so I think you can almost think of it like Sesame Street in the West, right? So like, I don't know if you can say it's popular, quote unquote, but you can definitely say that just about every single kid in Japan is familiar with Anpanman, right? They grow up watching the TV show, or they have a book or clothes or stuffed animals, and this is for both boys and girls. So like, they can recognize Anpanman even if they can't recognize, for example, Goku from Dragon Ball, right?
The difference though is like things like Sesame Street or whatever. Once people get older, they completely lose interest in it, but my high school students will still talk about Anpanman.
True. Yeah. I mean, I think
if I ask them to like write in English, write about your hero, no joke, at least 30% of the class is writing about Anpanman.
Yeah. I mean, I think the cute factor also plays into it, right? Because he's kind of cute. He's got a cute head. So, you can still appreciate it like a character out of context from like, even if you're not watching the show anymore, right?
He's just 4 circles.
Yeah, but so is Doraemon, right? Like Doraemon is basically just a bunch of circles. Yeah. Like even his hands are circles. He has no fingers.
Yeah, they were designed to be easy to draw by toddlers.
So go back to Baibai Kin. So
So his villain is Baikinman.
Yeah, which literally means like bacteria man, right?
Yeah. And his assistant is Kabi Dundun, who's
a mold based around mold because Kabi is mold.
Dundun I can't translate. Mold woman.
Yeah. Okay. So Baikinman, villain of Anpanman. What does he say when he leaves?
He says "Baibai Keen" and runs away.
Yeah, which is exactly the same.
Knocked away.
Which is the same as the Gyaru, supposedly, right? Gyaru-go, some would say Baibai Kin. So
yes, so he is the deity of the Gyaru.
Yeah, so before there were Gyaru, and he was there, and he ultimately led to the creation of Gyaru. That is what we are asserting here.
He is the OG Gyaru, the original Gyaru.
Yes, that is totally not true, but that is what we're sticking with.
He has no hair, but the hair he doesn't have is blonde. So
there you go. That is, he's the what do you call that? The primordial gyaru.
The primordial. He's Gyaru Prime.
Yes. Okay, so I think we'll leave it at that. We'll come back.
If you can picture that like design of like the monkey like slowly becoming a human, it starts with Baikimon and slowly becomes this girl in a mini skirt with blonde hair.
In like Shibuya. Okay, so we'll get to the hi bye thing after this short break. Hey, Tony here. So I got a few announcements. First of all, there are 2 new episodes of Japan Station. Normally, I would just say there's 1 new episode, but there are 2 new episodes because in episode 46, I interviewed Reina. She's a voice actor. She actually went to voice acting school in Japan, and we talk all about that. It's really interesting stuff. But I also recently, just a few days ago, actually, I did a collab with James from the Inside Japan podcast. So I interviewed him, he interviewed me, and I used both chunks of audio for episode 47 of Japan Station. So if you want to learn about me and working in Japan and my time working at a school for the blind and the time that I didn't get into a graduate school in Japan and blew like $200, I talk about that kind of stuff in episode 47 of Japan Station. So go check that out, japanstationpodcast.com or wherever you get your podcasts. And one last thing, the latest episode of Japanese Plus Alpha is out now. That is episode 4. Go check it out. It's all about, a couple of words that if you trace their etymology, like their history, they tie back to the way that people used to tell time in the Edo period. And this is kind of related to that whole curse of the ox that we discussed a few episodes ago, although this is a different way of telling time, actually. So if you want to learn more about that and timekeeping in the Edo period and some interesting words that are still used today, then you got to join the Patreon over at japankyo.com/Patreon. Join the Plus Alpha tier at $3 a month, and you'll have access to all 4 episodes that are out now. Episode 5 will be coming out around the end of the month, most likely. So go check that out. That really does help support this show immensely and all the other japankyo.com stuff that I'm working on. So with that out of the way, with all the self-promotion done, I think it's time to get back to the hi-bye talk. So hi. Hi.
Hi.
Hi. Okay, so now let's try to answer the question that I proposed at the beginning, right? So does hi mean bye in Japanese? Now, why did I come up with this question? Well, because like I said, I do work somewhere in an office where pretty much everybody speaks Japanese 90% of the time, at least. And so I listen to people, and how they're interacting with people on the phone. And I can't help but often like wonder like, oh, that's an interesting thing. I should notice. And one thing that I started noticing was when I would, for example, pick up the phone and talk to one of my coworkers and they would ask me to do something, we would end the phone call in like, they would say, onegai shimasu, which basically means like, please do this, whatever I just brought up. And then it would just go like, hi. And then we would just both like hang up the phone. Right? And
yeah, to me, hearing that sounds like how it would naturally occur in Japanese.
Yeah, and that's absolutely. And then, so I was naturally doing this, and then I started thinking like, oh, this is interesting, right? Because like, hi, how would people often explain like, what does hi mean in this stereotypical interpretation? What does hi mean?
They would tell you it means yes.
Right. Hi means yes. Sayonara means goodbye, and we're done. Japanese
the end.
now.
Yeah, it's just those 2 words. Hi, sayonara. It's kind of like binary. Yeah. You just combine them in different ways.
Yeah, that could be a good skit, right? Like it's just like hi, sayonara.
Honestly, that sounds exactly like some skit of some dude on a phone, like a busy businessman.
Yeah, and that could happen. That is a totally like feasible interaction that you could hear, like you said, a businessman on the phone. That could happen. But that's not necessarily all meaning like yes.
Even that
goodbye.
Hi is not yes so much as I'm still listening.
Right, exactly. So when I started like thinking about what I was doing and what I was hearing my coworkers do, and I started like transcribing like interactions and taking notes, and I managed to collect like 6 different ones. And most of them ended in hi. So that's funny, right? Because first of all, hi just sounds like the English hello, hi, right? So it's like, oh, when I'm saying bye, it sounds like I'm saying hi and ha ha ha. That's funny. But then on the other level, it's I'm ending a conversation with yes, right? Like,
And so are they.
yeah. So it's like, all right, I got what you're saying. Yes, yes, both hang up, right? Which sounds funny, but like we said, the reality is that hi isn't really yes. There's plenty of ways where hi is not being used as yes, and there's this misconception that hi equals yes, right? So
Yeah, I think it's almost never yes.
yeah, it's very rarely a one-to-one yes. And actually, like there's research that shows that there's plenty of languages in the world that don't have just one-to-one, like yes means blah, 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 and no means blah, blah, blah. It's actually, you say things in different ways. And there's not just, every time you would use yes, you use the same word in whatever language. And this is what we're talking about in Japanese. But something that you noticed in something you were reading recently, Ryan, can you explain?
Oh, yeah. So recently, I've been reading classic comic books of the X-Men. And for the first time, I read Wolverine's Adventures in Japan, which are all written in English, but there's always an editor note saying that it's occurring in Japanese. Mm-hmm. And they mix in Japanese words, but the words they put in are clearly based on what they expect them to mean in English and do not sound natural at all in Japanese.
Yeah, basically, like they weren't doing this at the time, but it's like you put it in Google Translate. I guess they were just using I guess they were just using actual paper dictionaries at the time, because that was back in the early 90s probably.
So first of all, lots of things are like misspelled.
Yeah.
Also, their understanding of sama, san, and chan is kind of interesting. But for today, so in English, if someone is surprised or very unhappy by a tragedy, they might be like, no!
Yeah.
So they had the characters shout, yeah! Because a dictionary will tell you that means no, but no one would ever say that in that situation. To me, again, not a native, but in my intuition, if you just shout, yeah, it's like you're really strongly refusing something.
Yeah.
It's not like a cry of pain or surprise or anything.
Yeah, exactly. Like maybe like yada or
yada, I think. I think it was usually girls in this that needed rescued because it's from like the 70s.
Gotcha.
They'd probably say kya.
Yeah, kya, yeah, which is like a meaningless
I think
scream.
Is okay.
Yeah. Yeah, kya is just like
yada or something.
Yeah, yada would be, again, kind of like a refusal nuance too, but probably way more common than yeah. Like if you're being accosted by someone, you probably wouldn't be saying yeah.
Yeah, like, so they're in a fight and like someone will get like knocked off a building and as they're falling, they're just like, yeah.
Yeah. That's such a like American action movie kind of thing. Like who is going to actually say no as they're falling down a building, right?
What do you feel? Because I feel like he's trying to deny that reality. Like the force of his will is going to push him back on top or something if you say EA.
Yeah, I mean, when you really think about it, that whole like no trope doesn't make any freaking sense, right? Like Darth Vader, no, right? Like,
well, he did not say that originally.
Anyway, so the point is that, like there's this tendency to just say yeah means no and hi means yes. And I taught like little kids Japanese for like a couple years in Florida. And that is often one of the first things they say. How do you say yes? How do you say no? And then I'd have to go like, well, it's a little more complicated than that. You can start with hi and ie, but actually it really just depends on the situation. And then, it's so tough to do that with a 5, 6 or 7 year old.
Like, from my experience, what would normally be yes would probably be so des or soda.
Right. Yeah.
And what would normally be no would just be whatever question was asked in its negative form. Mm-hmm. Like if they asked if you were going somewhere, instead of saying ie, you just say ikimasen.
Yeah.
You can say both together, but like the verb is more common.
Right.
I don't want to say more important, but more frequently there.
Yeah. Exactly. You would often just repeat kind of what was said, right?
Yeah, you repeat whatever the question word was as an affirmative or a negative, or if it's a yes, you can say so des.
Yeah.
I guess you could say so janai, but that sounds like you're correcting them or something.
Right, yeah. Let's say, or like, ya ikanai.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Ya, which again
honestly, iya I think is way more common than ie.
Yeah. So anyway, so the point here is that hi is used in many different ways. For example, like what we were talking about, the salaryman on the phone, the businessman on the phone, basically acknowledging that you're listening, right? So like, oh, hi. That doesn't really mean that you're saying yes to what they're telling you. That just means that you're listening. You're expressing that you're still on the phone listening, right?
The closest English I think would actually be okay.
Yeah.
Like if your boss is giving you instructions like step by step, between each step, you're probably saying, okay.
Right.
Like I understand or something.
Right. Yeah.
You're not like, yes.
Yeah. Another interesting usage would be like if you're handing over something to someone, especially like a present or like on Valentine's Day, a girl might give, might give somebody, the boy they like, chocolates, right? You would say, "Hai dozo," right? Or even just "Hai." You might hear that too. Just "Hai," and that one is almost just like a little, almost like a sound effect. Like it doesn't really have any specific meaning. It's just like I'm doing something, and this is the sound that goes along with it.
I feel like if you had to give it a strict definition, it's vague idea of affirmation.
Yeah. It's something along those lines. Because, for example, there's this thing where you when you ask a negative question in English, you answer with a negative no, right? So, aren't you cold? No, I'm not cold. Right?
Because I've lived in both cultures now, I just say, I'm not cold.
Yeah, no, I know. I almost never do that, but that's something that you end up encountering when you start learning Japanese.
You can do that in Japanese too, though.
Yeah, but the fact that the typical thing that they will teach you, right, is that you would say, "Hai, samukunai desu," right? Like, yes, again, like if you want to translate it as yes, you'd say like, yes, I'm not cold. But when you start doing that, then you get all confused because it's not actually yes. It's just an affirmation, say, like kind of agreeing with the statement that was proposed to you, which is like, aren't you cold? Like, I'm not cold. So.
That is true. But I always like to point out, you can answer the flip in Japanese too. Phrases like ii janai or omoshiroi janai.
Yeah.
Like, it's a negative question, but if you think it was omoshiroi, interesting, you would say, "Hai."
Right. Yeah. So it's flexible. And again, context does like so much, right? Like if it's obvious what you intend to say, even if it's perhaps not textbook accurate.
Yeah, the intention is more important than the actual words you use.
Yeah. And then one more usage that I thought of was like, for example, a student in class, when they raise their hand, they might go, "Hi," right? To answer a question.
That's another thing I want to point out is like, it's sort of a get someone's attention phrase.
Mm-hmm.
There's actually several of them. Like very formal would be like ano.
Yeah.
Ano sumimasen if you're trying to get like a clerk's attention.
Yeah.
Hi is middle, and if you're very friendly, you might just say ne.
Ne, yeah.
Yeah, ne, Tony.
Yeah. So,
since I'm a teacher, one of the most common ones I have is also like if you're taking attendance and call out their name, the proper response is hi.
Right. Yeah.
Or passing back papers or whatever.
True, yeah. Hi has many usages. It does not equal yes 100% of the time. In fact, most of the time, you probably wouldn't use yes in the situations where you're using hi. Which brings us back to the whole question of today, right? So, for example, in one interaction, I was saying like, "Onegai shimasu," they're asking me to do something. And then when I hang up the phone, I just say hi. And then they say hi. We're basically like acknowledging like this is the end of the interaction. Right?
Yeah.
We're done. We're going to hang up the phone now. And I do that. I would hear other coworkers do that when somebody would call but one important thing to note here is that it is somewhat informal. It's not quite like super formal. You would use something else in that situation. But because we're in the US and because everybody's kind of, I think Japanese people in the US generally start to get a little bit less formal. Because it is kind of tiring to maintain that super formality that you often see in certain business situations in Japan. So even people, when they come here, they start to get a little bit more informal for the most part. And here, my coworkers are usually pretty friendly with each other. We're all pretty friendly with each other. We still use some level of formality in some situations, but for the most part, we don't worry about it too much.
I think it's still pretty common here. So what I'm imagining in my school, if a like parent or some outside person calls the school, they probably won't end with a hi. But if they have we have like, you can just call the other offices because we have multiple offices in the school and you're talking to another teacher, then they probably will end with a hi because then they're
I totally
more
agree with that.
Close to each other.
Yeah. When I remember when I would be in the staff room and a parent would call, they would get super formal.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, but when they're talking to just each other, or like you said, like the office, like clerks, usually they get pretty informal.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'd say it's like middle formality because it's not like Jane level or anything.
Right. Yeah.
Or Kutabare.
Or Kutabare.
Or Baibai
yeah, Baibai ki. And then even like outside of the office, there are a lot of Japanese people in Hawaii, and I was in the elevator with a friend, and then somebody else came on, and then they knew each other, so they weren't super friendly, but they were kind of friendly. And so when the person was leaving, it ended up saying the person leaving said domo, and then the person leaving said hi, and then the person in the elevator said hi domo or something like that. So domo is another one that you might use in certain situations.
Yeah, domo.
Where you might say domo. Yeah.
Domo is another one that you can mean so many things.
Yeah. So it really is. It just depends on the context. But I guess if you were to say, does hi mean bye in Japanese? No, but it can be used in certain situations where you might say bye in English.
No, but in the same situation in another language, you would use bye.
Yeah, exactly. So, and this is all to point out that, one of the reasons why you might think learning Japanese or any language really is difficult is because at the beginning of the language learning process, all you want to do is translate, right? It's like, how do I say yes? How do I say no? How do I say bye? But the reality is that each situation may require a different word, and you have to learn that in order for you to sound natural.
Yeah, it's not just learning new words. It's learning a new way to use words.
Yeah. And the best way to learn those are in context, right? Because it's so hard to say like hi has 10 different usages. Remember every single usage so that you can
especially when you get like formality and relationships in there. If you feel like you are 70 points in closeness, use this one.
Yeah.
Like numerically rank formality or social closeness.
Yeah, that like learning things that way is super overwhelming. Like, I mean, I think it's important to read that chapter in the book, for example, like hi has all these many usages. Just be aware of this. And then once you're out in the world, like using it, then you'll remember, oh yeah, I thought I saw that in the book. Yeah. Okay. Now I understand. Now this makes sense. Oh, here's another usage that I read about. And then it really starts to stick in your mind.
I don't know why this came up in a philosophy class when I was an undergrad, but we were talking about different cultural practices. And the teacher mentioned many things, if you try to dissect them, like to explain them, like in a textbook, they come off as super unnatural and bizarre and almost incomprehensible, just from the complexity. But if you see them in context, in how they're used, they just seem like, oh, of course, that's so natural. Why would it not be that?
Oh yeah. I definitely, I think that's a perfect thing for language because like you start to see like the cause and effect and like all the little things going on around that one usage of, for example, hi or sayonara or whatever, right? Like it starts to, I think it's easier for us as the average person, right? As the average human to see it put together that way.
Yeah.
All right. So I think, can you think of anything else or should we say bye-bye keen?
It probably is Baibai Keen time.
All right. So
that's our new sign off.
Okay, let's say bye-bye keen. That's our new sign off. All right. So thanks for listening.
It seems like Yaru's not so popular, so we got to bring it back.
Yeah. Thanks for listening. If you have any questions that you want us to address, look into, research, talk about, you can email us at ichimon@japankyo.com. You can also tag me at Japankyo News on Twitter or Facebook. I should be able to, check out whatever you send me there. But email, I check that constantly. So that is best, ichimon@japankyo.com. You can find all the episodes that we've done so far at japankyo.com/ichimonjapan. So with that, it's time to say bye-bye keen.
Bye-bye keen.